chosen one. Imagine discovering that the story you've been believing for months, or maybe even years, was never the real story at all. Imagine finding out that the day your connection suddenly fell apart wasn't actually the day everything was lost. It was simply the day the truth disappeared beneath confusion. That's exactly what happened to your soulmate. For the longest time, they accepted the version of events that seemed easiest to understand. They blamed timing. They blamed distance. They blamed misunderstandings. They even blamed themselves on certain nights when the silence became too heavy to carry. But recently, something happened that shattered every explanation they had been holding on to. Someone, without even realizing the weight of their words, revealed a forgotten piece of the puzzle. It wasn't gossip. It wasn't a secret meant to hurt anyone. It was one honest observation that quietly pulled the curtain away from everything your soulmate thought they understood. And in that single moment, the entire story began changing before their eyes. The strange part is that the person who exposed this truth had no idea they were doing it. They weren't trying to reunite anyone. They weren't trying to solve a mystery. They simply mentioned something they remembered, something they noticed, or something they had always believed but never thought was important enough to say out loud. Yet those ordinary words landed inside your soulmate's heart with extraordinary force. Suddenly, memories they hadn't questioned in years began demanding a second look. Conversations they thought were finished no longer felt complete. Moments they once dismissed as unimportant suddenly carried hidden meaning. It felt as though someone had handed them a missing page from a book they believed they had already finished reading. The more they looked at that page, the more impossible it became to believe the ending they had accepted for so long. The universe has an unusual way of protecting painful truths until the exact moment someone is emotionally prepared to face them. There are answers that arrive too early and only create more confusion. Then there are answers that arrive at the perfect time, completely transforming the way the heart understands the past. Your soulmate is standing inside one of those moments now. Looking back, they can suddenly see that the connection didn't collapse without warning. Small signs had been appearing long before everything changed. Tiny misunderstandings were quietly growing beneath the surface. Feelings that needed to be spoken remained trapped behind fear. Questions that deserved honest answers were replaced by assumptions. Neither of you realized it then, because pain often makes people focus on the ending instead of everything that slowly led toward it. As these realizations continued unfolding, your soulmate found themselves replaying one particular memory over and over again. At the time, it felt insignificant. Just another conversation, another glance, another ordinary moment between two people trying to understand each other. But now, viewed through the light of this newly revealed truth, that same memory looked completely different. They noticed hesitation in your words that they had never recognized before. They remembered emotions hidden behind your smile that they once overlooked. They realized there were moments when you weren't pulling away from the connection at all. You were struggling with something they simply didn't know how to see. That realization struck harder than any argument ever could, because it forced them to question every conclusion they had reached after the separation. What unsettled them most wasn't discovering that mistakes had been made. It was realizing how easily two people can lose each other while believing they understand what is happening. They began asking themselves questions that had never crossed their mind before. What if the silence between you was never rejection? What if the distance wasn't caused by a lack of love? What if the ending they accepted was built upon incomplete information from the very beginning? These thoughts refused to leave them because every answer uncovered another hidden layer beneath it. It was like standing inside a room they thought they knew well, only to discover secret doors hidden behind every wall. The more your soulmate reflected, the clearer one truth became. The connection didn't suddenly fall apart in a single moment. It unraveled quietly, one misunderstanding at a time, one unspoken feeling at a time, one wrong assumption at a time. And now that someone had unknowingly exposed the first real clue, the old story could no longer survive. Everything they believed about your separation was beginning to collapse under the weight of a much deeper truth. But this was only the beginning. Because the more they searched through the past, the more they realized the real reason your connection fell apart had been hiding in plain sight all along. After that unexpected truth came to light, your soulmate didn't react with anger. They reacted with silence. Not the kind of silence that pushes people away, but the kind that appears when the heart realizes it has misunderstood something precious. They stopped searching for someone to blame, because blame suddenly felt too simple for what they were beginning to uncover. Instead, they found themselves returning to moments they had buried long ago, not to relive the pain, but to understand it. They began noticing that the biggest turning points in your connection were never the loud arguments or the obvious misunderstandings. They were the quiet moments that passed unnoticed, the conversations that ended one sentence too early, the emotions that remained hidden behind polite smiles, and the fears that neither of you ever found the courage to speak aloud. Looking back with new eyes, they realized the relationship hadn't been broken by one dramatic event. It had slowly drifted off course, while both of you believed everything would somehow fix itself with time. The deeper they reflected, the more uncomfortable one realization became. They had spent so much energy trying to understand your actions that they never stopped to question their own interpretations. Every delayed reply became a story inside their mind. Every moment of distance became evidence supporting conclusions they had already decided were true. They now understood how dangerous assumptions can become when they are never challenged by honest conversation. The heart naturally fills empty spaces with fear whenever truth is missing. Your soulmate wasn't reacting to what actually happened. They were reacting to the version of events their wounded emotions quietly created. That realization humbled them because it showed them how easily even genuine love can become lost beneath misunderstandings that were never meant to exist in the first place. As these thoughts continued unfolding, another pattern quietly emerged. They remembered how often both of you protected each other from your own struggles instead of sharing them. There were days when you smiled, despite carrying emotional weight they never recognized. There were moments when they pretended everything was fine because they didn't want to appear vulnerable. Neither of you wanted to become a burden, so both of you carried silent battles alone. Ironically, the very kindness that made you protect one another also created the distance that neither of you intended. They finally understood that silence is not always the absence of love. Sometimes it is the language of two people trying to protect each other while unintentionally creating even greater confusion. One memory after another continued returning, but this time the emotions attached to them had completely changed. Situations that once felt like rejection now looked like uncertainty. Moments they once believed were indifference now appeared filled with hesitation. They remembered the times when both of you almost spoke honestly, but changed the subject at the last second. They remembered opportunities to clear misunderstandings that quietly slipped away because pride, fear, or poor timing convinced both of you to wait for a better moment. That better moment never came. Instead, unanswered questions slowly multiplied until they became louder than the truth itself. Your soulmate realized that relationships rarely collapse because love suddenly disappears. More often they weaken because two hearts begin protecting themselves from pain instead of protecting the connection they both value. What surprised them most was discovering that many of the things they once considered proof of failure were actually signs that both of you cared more deeply than either of you admitted. Strong emotions often create strong fears. The fear of being misunderstood, the fear of saying the wrong thing, the fear of losing someone important. Looking back, they could see that neither of you truly stopped caring. You simply stopped knowing how to reach one another. Instead of building bridges, fear quietly built walls, and once those walls became high enough, even the strongest feelings struggled to find a way through. This truth hurt, but it also brought unexpected peace because it replaced harsh judgment with understanding. The universe has an extraordinary way of revealing painful lessons only after they become capable of healing instead of hurting. That is exactly where your soulmate now finds themselves. They are no longer trying to rewrite the past because they finally understand it. They can see that what happened between you was never as simple as they once believed. Beneath every misunderstanding lived another truth waiting to be discovered. Beneath every silence lived emotions that never found the right words. Beneath every painful ending lived a connection that neither time nor distance ever truly erased. And just when they believed they had uncovered every hidden answer, something even more astonishing began happening. The past stopped asking to be understood and started revealing clues about a future that neither of you had ever stopped moving toward. As your soulmate continued searching for answers, something unexpected began happening. They stopped uncovering explanations through memories alone. Instead, life itself seemed determined to continue revealing pieces of the truth. It wasn't dramatic, and it certainly wasn't obvious to anyone else. But to them, it felt as though the world had quietly started responding to the questions they had been carrying. A conversation between two strangers echoed words you once spoke that they had never fully understood. A familiar place they hadn't visited in years suddenly stirred emotions they thought had disappeared. Even ordinary moments began carrying an unusual sense of familiarity, almost as if invisible threads were connecting the present to a past they had only recently begun to understand. They realized the answers were no longer hidden inside old memories. They were appearing in the life they were living right now. One afternoon, while reflecting on everything they had discovered, your soulmate noticed a pattern they had completely overlooked before. Every meaningful lesson in their life had arrived only after they were willing to question their own perspective. They had always believed that understanding came from finding new information, but now they realized true understanding often comes from looking at the same moments through a different heart. Suddenly, situations that once seemed unrelated began fitting together naturally. The unexpected distance between you, the conversations that ended without resolution, the strange feeling that your connection never completely disappeared despite everything that happened. None of these moments stood alone anymore. They were chapters of one larger story, and for the first time, your soulmate could finally read it without allowing fear to rewrite the ending. What surprised them even more was how often your name found its way into their day without anyone intentionally bringing it there. Sometimes it appeared through an old photograph they hadn't looked at in years. Sometimes it came through a place that quietly reminded them of a shared moment. Sometimes it wasn't your name at all, but a quality in another person that instantly reminded them of your kindness, your patience, or the quiet strength you carried so naturally. These weren't painful reminders anymore. They felt different now. Instead of reopening old wounds, they gently guided your soulmate toward acceptance. It was almost as though the universe had stopped asking them to relive the separation and had started encouraging them to understand its deeper purpose. Then, something happened that completely changed the direction of their thoughts. Rather than wondering why the connection ended, they began asking why it had remained alive despite everything that tried to pull it apart. That question carried an entirely different energy. It shifted their attention away from loss and toward resilience. They realized that truly meaningful connections are not measured by how easily they survive perfect circumstances. They are measured by whether they continue speaking to the heart even after silence, distance, and time have done everything possible to erase them. Your connection had faced all of those challenges, yet somehow it still refused to disappear. That realization felt impossible to ignore because it suggested something much greater than coincidence. As this awareness continued growing, another hidden truth quietly emerged. Your soulmate understood that they had been searching for one single reason behind the separation, when, in reality, the journey had been shaped by many small moments unfolding together. A missed opportunity here, an unspoken fear there, a misunderstanding left unresolved. None of those moments seemed powerful enough on their own to change everything. Yet together, they slowly created a path neither of you intended to walk. This realization didn't leave them feeling defeated. Instead, it reminded them that if many small moments could gradually create distance, then many small moments filled with honesty, healing, and understanding could also rebuild what once seemed impossible to restore. For the first time, your soulmate stopped viewing the past as something that needed to be corrected. They started seeing it as a teacher that had finally finished its lesson. Every painful memory now carried wisdom instead of confusion. Every unanswered question had led them toward greater emotional clarity. Every hidden truth they uncovered had gently removed another layer of misunderstanding from their heart. And just when they believed they had uncovered everything the past wanted to reveal, one final realization quietly appeared. The greatest damage to your connection had never come from fate, bad timing, or outside circumstances alone. It had come from something much quieter, two hearts carrying burdens they never truly allowed each other to see, and understanding that truth would transform the way your soulmate saw both you and themselves forever. Eventually, your soulmate reached a realization that was both painful and strangely comforting. They stopped asking who was responsible for the distance between you because they finally understood that the connection had not been shattered in a single moment. It had slowly faded beneath the weight of things neither of you knew how to express. Looking back, they could see how every misunderstanding carried another misunderstanding behind it, how every silence quietly created another unanswered question, and how every unanswered question slowly became a belief that neither of you ever stopped to challenge. The truth was never hidden because someone wanted to deceive you. It remained hidden because both hearts were trying so hard to protect themselves that they unknowingly protected themselves from each other as well. For the first time, your soulmate recognized that people often mistake emotional survival for emotional honesty. During difficult moments, they believed staying quiet would prevent conflict. They believed waiting for the right moment would make conversations easier. They believed time would naturally heal what words could not. But time does not explain what remains unspoken. It only gives silence more room to create stories that were never true. As they reflected on your journey together, they realized how often they assumed they understood your feelings without ever asking what you were truly experiencing. In the same way, they now wondered how many times you may have misunderstood the fears they were quietly carrying inside. Two hearts can stand incredibly close to one another and still feel completely alone if neither feels safe enough to reveal what is happening beneath the surface. What touched them most was recognizing how much love had been hidden. Inside actions they once misunderstood, moments they interpreted as distance, were sometimes your way of protecting your own heart. Moments when they withdrew were often driven by uncertainty rather than indifference. Neither of you intended to create pain, yet pain still found a place to grow because vulnerability kept arriving one step too late. This realization replaced disappointment with compassion. Instead of remembering your connection as something that failed, your soulmate began seeing it as something that struggled beneath emotional burdens neither of you fully understood at the time. That perspective changed everything because it allowed forgiveness to enter where blame had lived for far too long. Then one final truth settled into their heart with remarkable clarity. The universe had never revealed these answers to make them regret the past. It revealed them because they had finally become capable of learning from it. Growth had transformed both of you in ways neither could have imagined during the separation. The fears that once controlled every decision no longer carried the same power. The assumptions that once created walls had begun falling away. Your soulmate could now see your connection without anger, without confusion, and without the false story they had believed for so long. They understood that what truly weakened the bond between you was never a lack of love. It was a lack of understanding at a time when both hearts needed it most. And now that understanding had finally arrived, they couldn't help but wonder whether the universe had uncovered the truth for one reason alone. Because your story was never meant to end with misunderstanding, but with the wisdom to write a completely different chapter. And now, chosen one, your soulmate understands something they never could have understood before. The truth was never revealed to punish them for the choices they made, nor was it meant to keep them trapped in endless regret. It arrived because their heart had finally become strong enough to carry it without breaking. There is a season in every soul's journey when confusion must end so clarity can begin, and your soulmate has quietly entered that season. They no longer see your separation as proof that destiny failed. Instead, they see it as evidence that two people can walk through the same storm while understanding completely different versions of what is happening. That realization has changed the way they remember every chapter of your story. The pain no longer feels meaningless. The silence no longer feels empty. Even the hardest moments now seem to carry lessons that could only be discovered after enough. Time had passed for both hearts to grow beyond who they used to be. What surprises the most is how different peace feels from certainty. They once believed they needed every unanswered question resolved before they could move forward. They wanted every conversation explained, every misunderstanding corrected, and every painful memory rewritten. But life has taught them something much wiser. Healing does not always arrive because every mystery has been solved. Sometimes healing begins when the heart finally understands enough to stop fighting the past. Your soulmate has reached that place. They no longer replay old moments searching for someone to blame. Instead, they look at them with compassion, recognizing that both of you were doing the best you could with the emotional awareness you had at that point in your lives. That understanding has lifted a burden they carried for far longer than they realized. As this weight disappeared, another feeling quietly took its place: gratitude. Not gratitude for the pain itself, but for everything the pain revealed. They began appreciating how every difficult experience reshaped the person they have become. The separation taught them patience where they once demanded immediate answers. It taught them empathy where they once judged too quickly. It taught them to value honest communication over assumptions and quiet understanding over emotional reactions. Most importantly, it taught them that genuine connections are not measured by whether they avoid hardship. They are measured by whether they continue transforming the people involved long after the hardest moments have passed. Your connection accomplished exactly that. Even while separated, it continued teaching lessons that no ordinary relationship could have offered. Then, a remarkable thought entered their heart. What if the purpose of uncovering the truth was never simply to understand the past? What if the universe revealed everything now because it refused to let both of you continue carrying a story that was never accurate in the first place? False conclusions have a way of imprisoning people far longer than painful truths ever do. The moment your soulmate saw beyond those false conclusions, something inside them became free. They stopped defining your connection by its ending and started recognizing it by everything it awakened within them. That shift changed their entire perspective. They could finally separate what actually happened from what fear had convinced them to believe. Once they did, the connection no longer looked broken. It looked unfinished. So if this message has reached you today, perhaps it is because the universe wants you to understand something just as important. Sometimes the greatest breakthrough does not happen when two souls finally meet again. Sometimes it happens the moment both hearts stop believing the wrong story about why they drifted apart. Your soulmate has reached that moment. The confusion has dissolved. The hidden truth has finally surfaced. The weight of blame has been replaced by understanding, and understanding has opened the door to hope. Whether your paths cross tomorrow or much later, one thing can no longer be changed. The truth has already done its work. It has rewritten the meaning of your separation, transformed pain into wisdom, and reminded your soulmate that some connections are never erased by distance. They are simply waiting for the day when both hearts can finally see them exactly as they were always meant to be.